It's week 16 in the NFL season. Every game is huge from this point on, but you can make an argument that week 16 may be the most pivotal matchup for the Seahawks as the Vikings come to town. We're going to be breaking down why here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be teaming up here for our latest Matchup Wednesday with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in Snohomish, Washington, or Battle Creek, Michigan. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks going to be looking to bounce back from a tough loss to the Packers on Sunday Night Football. The competition's not going to be any easier, though. The 12-2 Minnesota Vikings coming to town. We're going to dive into the 6 key matchups to watch as these two teams duel at Lumen Field in Seattle's regular season home finale. Plus, we're going to take a look at the updated playoff picture, courtesy of our friends over at PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LOCKED on NFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. After losing to the Packers on Sunday night, the Seahawks dropped to 8-6. Not only did they add a loss in the loss column, though, they moved down to second place in the NFC West because the Rams right now have the tiebreaker after winning their first matchup in week 9. Obviously, it appears there's a collision course here, Rob, in week 18 between the Seahawks and the Rams at SoFi Stadium. But that game may become a moot point if the Seahawks are not able to get the job done this weekend and the week after when they have that quick turnaround Thursday Night Football against the Chicago Bears. Because if they win or don't win both those games and the LA Rams win both of their next 2 games, it won't matter what happens in week 18. The LA Rams will be the champions of the division, even if they lose to the Seahawks, because they will have all of the tiebreakers lined up in their favor. So let's just put it this way. This game coming up this week against the Vikings is the biggest game yet this season. The Seahawks absolutely have to have it.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it. I mean, this is a playoff game. I mean, you lose and you basically are out. I think it's 10% chance the Seahawks would have of making the playoffs if they were to lose this game against the Minnesota Vikings this Sunday. So that to me is where it really comes down to, is that we can have all the conversations about what happens if the Seahawks win or lose or whatever. It doesn't really matter. You've absolutely got to beat a Minnesota Vikings team that is very talented, has won every game basically since going back to before not only Thanksgiving, but Halloween. I mean, this is a hot team, but the Seahawks are desperate. They need this victory. As you said, Corbin, the Seahawks currently are losing in every tiebreaker imaginable against the LA Rams. And so you're hoping that the Rams are going to lose this week. You're hoping that the Seahawks are able to beat the Minnesota Vikings. And, I see some interesting matchups in this game that suggest that Seattle might be able to pull off what is being portrayed as a significant upset.
You look at the way that the Vikings have played this year. There have obviously been a number of dominant victories. The beginning of the season, they beat the 49ers when San Francisco was much closer to full strength. They had a lot of the guys that got hurt later in the year. But they lost to the Rams on Thursday Night Football. They had a game against the Arizona Cardinals a few weeks ago. I went back and watched it. I don't know how Arizona lost that game. They did everything they could to choke that game away late. The Cardinals had that win in Minnesota. It was on the road. This is a team that's pretty good, but they are certainly not invincible. The 12-2 record suggests that they have been for the most part. This is a really good football team. They've also had some games, though, where they've squeaked by, and that's what good teams do. The great teams find ways to win the games when they're not playing great. We saw the Seahawks do it against the New York Jets a few weeks back. But you have got to have this game again. As you mentioned, the odds for the Seahawks, if they win this game, and this is not even considering whatever happens in the Rams game. If Seattle beats the Vikings, their playoff odds jump up to 50%. If they lose this game, they drop down to 10%, as you mentioned. So it's not, end of the world chances like the 49ers, who are less than 1% right now. I mean, the 49ers would have to have Seattle and the Rams lose their next 2 games, then tie each other in week 18 to even have a chance to make the playoffs. That's the one scenario that gets the 49ers the division title. But the Seahawks would be at a pretty steep chance of making the postseason if they don't win this game. Now, that is, again, it's not based on whatever happens in the Rams game. If the Rams lose to the Jets, that dictates a different percentage. Seattle's odds would jump quite a bit because the Rams would have messed up an opportunity to create some separation too. So they've got to control their own destiny. But from Seattle's perspective, again, Seattle, at least for the last 3 games, Rob, they are in position to control their own destiny by winning out. If they win the last 3 games, they win the NFC West. There's no way that it doesn't matter what the Rams do in their other games. If the Seahawks win out and they are able to get to 11 wins, they're NFC West champions and they're the number 3 seed. They get a home playoff game. But if you slip up in one of these games coming up before you play the Rams and they win both of theirs, you're done. Unless somehow the Commanders choke and you get the wild card, which they have a very slim odd of doing that at this point. The Packers and Vikings are already way ahead of everybody else in that category. Seattle doesn't have the tiebreaker against Green Bay. So at this point, the Seattle Seahawks, best bet to make the playoffs is to win the division. You got to win right now. And losing this game would be a monumental shot at their chances of getting into the postseason.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the fact that you mentioned the Washington Commanders, because if you just look at just their records, Washington's 9-5. They are going to be facing the Philadelphia Eagles, a very talented team. I think that's very good likelihood that Philadelphia wins that game. And then suddenly Washington is 9-6. If Seattle wins this game, they also be 9-6. But as you just pointed out, Seattle is going to lose a lot of the tiebreakers here. And so again, Seattle essentially has to go 3-0 to finish up the regular season. And obviously, once you get to the real playoffs, it is one and done. And so essentially the playoffs begin right now for the Seahawks, because if they are going to be able to get into the playoffs, they have to win the NFC West division. They're going to be losing too many of the tiebreakers to be able to come in as a wild card. And so again, it's going to be all hands on deck against the Minnesota Vikings, a team that, as you just pointed out, against the Arizona Cardinals, that they essentially had lost that game, and Arizona was unable to basically seal the deal. So that's the thing, is why I'm so excited about this week's matchup Wednesday kind of conversation, because it does feel like the Seahawks are a little bit better suited to go up against the Minnesota Vikings than they were against a similarly talented but very differently allocated talent of the Green Bay Packers a week ago.
Yeah, I'm really excited to break down all these matchups. And there are certainly some areas where Minnesota excels that have not been a strength for the Seahawks. And we'll get into some of those as we dive into these matchups as well. But this is a beatable team. They are one of the best teams in the NFC. And we talked about it yesterday. I think they are a Super Bowl contender. But I think that the Seahawks can, if the Seahawks play their capable football, Geno Smith was back, full participant today at practice. That's great news. You have a healthy Geno Smith for this game. I think Seattle's got a fighting chance, but it's going to boil down to how they handle things in the trenches and how they are able to handle some of those skill players for the Minnesota Vikings, because they've got some outstanding weapons, and Kevin O'Connell knows how to get the football to him. He sets things up favorably for his quarterback, Sam Darnold. So we're going to be diving into those matchups here in a moment. Really, the point that we're trying to hammer home here, I kind of want to finish off here just real quick with that wild card example. The Commanders would need to lose all 3 of their final games, and Seattle would need to go 2-1, and then Seattle would have the advantage there. But that's asking the Commanders to lose their last 3 games. I just don't see that happening. Your best bet, just take care of your own business. Just win your games and win the NFC West. Wild card is a crapshoot at this point. Not that it's impossible. It could still happen, but you got a much better chance to just control your own destiny, go get the division. NFC West is the best way to get into the playoffs. Maybe the Rams can get a wild card going 2-1 and Seattle goes 3-0, but let them be the ones that have to worry about the Commanders not winning their games instead of you. That is the blueprint to get to the playoffs. When we come back, we're going to start off matchup Wednesday. We get Seahawks on defense going up against Kevin O'Connell's Vikings offense, one of the most potent offenses in the NFL. Don't go away. You're listening to Matchup Wednesday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. Get ready for the final stretch of the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL, and it's all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, watch live play-by-play, and so much more. On the same page where you place your bets, you can bet on everything from Geno Smith and Sam Darnold scoring a combined 5 or more touchdowns on Sunday afternoon at Lumen Field, or Justin Jefferson being the first skill player to find the end zone for a touchdown. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with a college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thanks, as always, for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It's Week 16, Matchup Wednesday. Seahawks hosting the Vikings in what could be their home finale for the season. At least it is for the regular season. They're trying to earn that home playoff game as an NFC West champion. And to make that happen, you got to win football games. The Vikings come in with one of the best offenses in the NFL. Sam Darnold, what a reclamation season he's had. Very similar to Geno Smith a couple years ago for the Seahawks in his first year as a starter. The weapons he's got around him. I think that's where we've got to start this conversation in this game, because Justin Jefferson just made history. The first receiver ever to hit 7,000 career yards in his 5th season. The dude is 25 years old, and he's already got 7,000 receiving yards. He is having a monster season, almost 1,300 receiving yards with 3 games left to play, 8 touchdowns. Reek Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, Josh Jobe, you need to play one of the best games that you possibly can, or this is a guy that can absolutely he can turn into one-man show and just dominate you and put points on the scoreboard.
Yeah, and yet I feel like this is a team in the Minnesota Vikings, and specifically with the quarterback Sam Darnold, the wide receivers, whether it be Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor is their primary slot receiver. That is actually in some ways better on paper than they are in reality. And let's just kind of start the conversation with Sam Darnold. Again, as you said, Corbin, I mean, he has been one of the most fascinating stories of this season. He's got 29 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. It is very similar to what Seattle experienced with Geno Smith a couple of years ago. I mean, as we talked about in yesterday's show, the Minnesota Vikings, of course, selected J.J. McCarthy at their first of 2 first-round selections a year ago, and so they certainly weren't expecting this. Kevin O'Connell as head coach deserves an awful lot of credit, but this is a little bit of a shocker in some ways that Sam Darnold is having the success that he is. That said, Justin Jefferson, everybody who ever watched him at LSU, even though he didn't play very long there, he was spectacular there. And he's, translated that success in the SEC to the NFL. As you said, almost 1,300, pass receptions so far, 1,300 in receiving yards, I should say, so far this year. 82 catches, 1,243 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's been phenomenal. At that same time, he's only got 4 games in which he's over 100 yards. He's got 8 touchdowns, but a lot of those were early in the season. I mean, this feels like if Seattle wants to move their cornerbacks around, as I mentioned before, Corbin, I really think that the Seattle is a little bit better suited to prepare against the Minnesota Vikings than perhaps they were against the Green Bay Packers. Seattle's strength, at least in my opinion, on defense is the cornerbacks. I'm fascinated to see what Mike McDonald is going to be willing to do. Is he going to be willing to move Devin Witherspoon around? Is it going to be Tariq Woolen, perhaps coming off of his ugliest game to date, in a Seahawk uniform this past game against the Green Bay Packers? Are they going to be willing to move players around to try to match up against Justin Jefferson, against Jordan Addison? Naylor has 5 touchdowns himself. As I mentioned, Justin Jefferson has 8. Jordan Addison has 7 touchdowns, including 3 2 weeks ago against the Atlanta Falcons. 15 touchdowns between the 2 top receivers. But again, their slot receiver has 5 scores of his own. Seattle has talent, the cornerback position in Witherspoon, certainly in Tariq Woolen, and then definitely in Josh Jobe as well. I am fascinated by how Seattle is going to move their corners to be able to try and slow down a Minnesota offense that when it is humming, it might just be the best in all of the NFL.
But if the Seahawks are going to have any chance to win this game, you can't have a game like last week where the quarterback is just basically sitting back on a lazy boy and can just do whatever he wants. And they were able to get a little more pressure on Jordan Love in the second half because they were stopping the run, which they didn't do early in the game. But I'm looking at the interior offensive line for the Minnesota Vikings. Garrett Bradbury is a pretty good center. I would say he's an elite one, but he is in that next tier down, a quality starting center that can be beaten by power at times. And then I look at Seattle's interior defensive line with Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed. Byron Murphy had a quietly really good game the other night against the Green Bay Packers. He made some really nice splash plays. That interior defensive line, in the past, Sam Darnold, the key to getting him to make bad decisions has been interior pressure. If you can push the pocket back into his face, he starts seeing ghosts. You may remember in the time of New York Jets. He hasn't had to worry about that as much in Minnesota, but he has thrown 11 picks. It's not like he has been mistake-free. He has turned the ball over some. If Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed and company can get after it and they can beat Garrett Bradbury, Ed Ingram at the right guard spot, who has given up a handful of sacks this year. He's been solid, but he's given up some sacks. If that interior defensive line can get consistent pressure up the middle on Sam Darnold, it's going to speed up that clock, and Sam Darnold still has that ability to make some throws that he shouldn't. It is still showing up at times this year. He's been spectacular much of the season, but there are turnovers there to be had if the interior can create that pressure and make it easier for the guys in the back end.
Yeah, and I love that you referenced some of the things that has been kind of the kryptonite to Sam Darnold's Superman that we have seen much of this season, and specifically in the interior of the offensive line. Garrett Bradbury, as you correctly said, he is one of the most athletic centers in all of the NFL, but he is vulnerable to power. So that might be something that Jay Reed, that Byron Murphy might be able to create a little bit of push. We shall see. Maybe Jonathan Hankins. At this point, considering the interceptions and the fact that he is now getting himself into the sack column, maybe he is able to provide that. You also mentioned Ed Ingram at the right guard position, whether it be whether it be Dalton Risner. Still, I think that Seattle has got to be able to create a little bit of pressure at that right guard position. And I want to specifically talk about the Minnesota Vikings left guard. Blake Brandel is a player that I remember evaluating as an offensive tackle at Oregon State a couple of years ago. He's 6'6", 305 pounds. He was basically, he saw a handful of starts over his first 3 seasons with the Vikings, mostly on the outside. He has come inside to play left guard for all of Minnesota's 14 starts so far this season. Corbin, he's allowed 7 sacks so far this year. That is a position that Seattle should be able to create a little bit of pressure right up the middle. As you said, Sam Darnold's a pretty good athlete, but he is not nearly as accurate on the move as he is when he is flat-footed and be able to survey the entire field. So again, look, you'd love to be able to get some pressure on the outside, obviously, but again, Sam Darnold's pretty creative. If you can get pressure right in his face, he is prone to throwing a kind of a gimme ball out there. And again, because Seattle has the cornerback talent that they have, I do think this is a position that Seattle should be able to exploit if the 12s bring it as they need to Sunday.
And I think the other matchup that is worth noting here, Minnesota is in the middle of the pack running the football. I believe they're 15th or 16th in rushing yards this year. So they haven't been anemic by any means, but they haven't been dominant in that regard. They haven't needed to be, though. Their run game has been good enough that they have one of the most dynamic play action pass games in the entire NFL. And that's been a big part of Sam Darnold's success, the play action game. And he has a running back in Aaron Jones who is almost to the 1,000-yard mark. He's averaging 4.6 yards per carry, still a very good runner. But what scares me most about Aaron Jones, this guy is a receiver playing running back, and he has been ever since he came in the league. Aaron Rodgers used to kill teams throwing the football to Aaron Jones. One of the teams that knows that well, the Seahawks in the playoff game in 2020 or 2019, when they used Aaron Jones in the passing game, and he was breaking tackles, making guys miss. He is still as good of a receiving running back as there is in the NFL. Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight have to play better than they did this past week against Green Bay. I thought in the second half that those two played much better, but first half, that to me was one of the biggest reasons the Packers were having success. I didn't think the linebackers played very well against the run. Seemed like they were out of place a lot. You cannot do that in this game against Aaron Jones, and you better be on your high horse in coverage because this is a guy that can win vertically from the running back position. They can slide him out in the slot and match him up with a linebacker. He can create so many problems. So you got to get him slowed down in the run game, but you also got to worry about him as a receiver, which to me, this, if I'm the Vikings, would be a matchup that I'm looking at closely thinking, how can I get him isolated on Seattle's linebackers?
Yeah, and I think that Minnesota is going to try and do the exact same thing that Green Bay did, of course. They're going to try and silence that crowd by just having a drive to start off the game that just kind of shows their dominance at the line of scrimmage and really establishes the running game. I think that Seattle has got to kind of combat that the same way they did, as you mentioned, when Seattle played so much better in the second half against Josh Jacobs of the Packers, and that is to be able to punch the football out. Again, you're talking about Aaron Jones is a dynamic back. He has been very successful as both an interior runner, as an exterior runner on the outside, and then as a receiver. One of the things that he has always struggled with, and definitely is struggling with so far this season, is getting the ball punched out. He's got 5 fumbles so far this season. Again, just like the Seahawks were able to punch out a ball against Josh Jacobs, if that, of course, ultimately led to Zach Charbonnet breaking away for his own touchdown to make that a little bit of a game this past weekend. If Seattle can be punching the ball every opportunity they have with Aaron Jones on the field, or even if it's Cam Akers as the backup running back for the Vikings at this point. Obviously, Seahawks fans are very familiar with Cam Akers this time with the LA Rams. That to me is something that Seattle potentially might be able to steal the football, create a short field to create some points of their own.
When we come back, we are going to flip the script. We've got the Seahawks on offense going up against a feisty, aggressive Brian Flores coached Vikings defense. That'll be coming up next here on Matchup Wednesday on Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members, and it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform that offers an injury insurance policy so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. They also have the flex play, which means you can still cash out the lineup even if it isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Think Justin Jefferson's going to go for more than 83.5 yards against the Seahawks on Sunday, or Geno Smith's going to throw more than 1.5 touchdowns. You could cook up your hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money in Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL. Get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's the code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. This episode's also brought your way by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about? or that you were paying for twice. That definitely has happened to me. Disney Plus, anyone. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for. Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's a subscription, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services such as Disney Plus that I was getting charged for twice. I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Welcome back to Matchup Wednesday here on the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuned in. Thanks as always for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Matchup Wednesday continues. We've got the Seahawks on offense going up against the Vikings on defense. And this is certainly a team, Rob, that you have to make sure that you dot your I's and cross your T's, because Brian Flores is going to be coming after you. And it's not always blitzes, it's sim pressures. He finds different, unique ways to generate pressures and confuse the quarterback. He's as good as any defensive coordinator out there, and he's got plenty of talent to work with as well. One of the players that has really thrived in his defense coming over from the Houston Texans, Jonathan Grenard, 11 sacks, 4 forced fumbles this year. He has turned into a star rushing off the edge in Brian Flores' defense. The Vikings have a few other decent edge guys that they rotate in, but Grenard is the absolute star of this group, and he will play some on both sides. Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross have to be playing at their very best, because this is a guy that can beat you with speed. He can beat you with power. He can beat you with developed counter moves. He's a very polished rusher at this stage of his career, and he can cause a lot of problems for opposing blockers.
Yeah, and it's not just as a pass rusher. I mean, as you said, he's got 11 sacks. He's got 15 tackles for loss. And the Vikings are far from one-dimensional. I mean, they got Andrew Van Ginkel. He's got kind of a funny name, and I guess in a way, he's got 9 sacks of his own. Patrick Jones II's got 7 sacks. And that's the thing, Corbin, is they're primarily an outside pass rushing team. Like Sam Darnold, as we talked about before, where he really struggles is when he has pressure in his face. I would argue that Geno Smith is that same way. Hell, Sam Howell is the same way. You get pressure in his face. They got nowhere for these quarterbacks to step up. That's really where a lot of quarterbacks struggle, especially those kind of traditional pocket passers. Yep. As I just mentioned, with Grenard, 11 sacks, Van Ginkel, 9 sacks, Turner with 7, Patrick Jones, Dallas Turner is their first round pick. That was other than the quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, I mentioned before. He's only got a couple of sacks, but still, the Minnesota Vikings are absolutely loaded on the outside. That said, they only got a fraction of their sacks on the inside. Harrison Phillips, the longtime Buffalo Bills standout, former Morris Trophy Award winner, actually, is a guy who actually leads the Vikings with 2 sacks from the defensive tackle position. So we all know that Seattle has struggled on the interior, but I feel like the best of their offensive line is outside left tackle and Charles Cross, the right tackle and Abraham Lucas. Again, Seattle feels like they are better suited to go up against Minnesota's pass rush than most teams are. So that is absolutely key to this victory, is you have to be able to pass protect, obviously. But again, I think that Seattle is well suited to be able to handle that pass rush, as formidable as it might be. The Vikings are among the top 10 in all of the NFL, 42 sacks so far this season. They've been spectacular, but they are a little bit one-dimensional in that regard.
Yeah, they really have been dynamic on the outside, and you don't want to overlook them because, Abraham Lucas has been kind of up and down since he returned to the lineup in pass protection. He's had some pretty good games. He's had some not so good games, this Green Bay game being one of them. Cross has generally been pretty rock solid this year. a lot of their problems have been in the interior. Does that mean the Vikings pass rush comes to life in the interior? It could. I mean, Harrison Phillips has a history where he has been able to get some pressure on quarterbacks. Green Bay didn't have a lot of interior sacks going into last week, and they ate up the interior line for the Seahawks. So they've got to be able to run the football. I'm going to keep going back to this week after week. We saw what they did in Arizona 2 weeks ago. I think the Cardinals' interior defensive line is probably better than what the Minnesota Vikings is. And Seattle was able to run the football almost at will on them, at least in the first half. Arizona made some adjustments. Seattle didn't necessarily adjust themselves, only scored 6 points in the second half of that game, but they rushed for over 170 yards in that contest. You've got to be able to get the run game going. The thing that is going to be worth watching in this game, though, Rob, Zach Charbonnet and Ken Walker were both out today. Charbonnet is now dealing with an oblique injury. Now, it may be something that is truly day-to-day, and he's back tomorrow. It could be something. Ken Walker missed 2 games with an oblique injury earlier this year. We don't know if Ken Walker is going to be back this week. So now the focus shifts to Kenny McIntosh, who has ran the ball pretty well the last 2 weeks. He's got 14 carries for 63 yards this year. So he's been effective when he's had his opportunities. But if Seattle has to go into this game with Kenny McIntosh and George Halani as their 2 primary running backs, the Vikings have a couple of really solid inside linebackers. One of their best ones, Ivan Pace, is on injured reserve, but Blake Cashman, 81 tackles, 3 sacks, 7 pass breakups. Cashman's a guy I love coming out of Minnesota. He had some injuries early in his career. The last 2 years, though, he's been healthy, and he has been a real problem for NFL offenses because he is a versatile all-around linebacker that can do a little bit of everything. If you are playing a third-string running back and you don't have Charbonnet and or Walker in this game, that is going to put Seattle at a significant disadvantage because they have to be able to run the ball, and they got to run more than they did last week to have a chance to beat this Vikings team.
Your words to Ryan Grubb's ears is basically the way I would articulate this, is that I don't care who Seattle has a running back. Hell, bring some Skittles in, bring Marshawn Lynch back onto the field. Seattle has absolutely got to be able to run the football against Minnesota. Look, I like Blake Cashman as well. I think that Camus Grugier-Hill, who has taken over for Ivan Pace and did a pretty solid job, is also a solid starting inside linebacker in the NFL. I don't think that either one of them are the type of standouts that are going to force you to just say the heck with it. Let's just throw the football over the field the way that Ryan Grubb basically has kind of prioritized, I think, in so far his rookie season as an NFL play caller. I think it is critical. And I expect Zach Charbonnet to be on the field. I think that Kenneth Walker is likely to be on the field for this game because, again, I think that Seattle recognizes that this is essentially win or stay home for the playoffs because you've absolutely got to win this football game. And again, I do think that this is a defensive tackle group that you should be able to create a little push. I feel very strongly this is an inside linebacker group that you should be able to run the ball and throw the ball to your backs a little bit to create some push. And again, I think that you've got to kind of challenge Kenneth Walker at this point. Like, hey, Zach Charbonnet could be stealing your job at this point. Or don't you want to get back onto the field? I do think that you can attack Minnesota's linebackers. At least I feel like that is a positional group that, again, Seattle has a little bit of an advantage here. They just have to recognize their own strengths rather than, maybe focusing on what they've been able to have success, whether it be at the college level or the NFL level in the past.
And I think the last matchup that we've got to zero in on, you and I, we both love tasty reunions when we do these matchup Wednesdays,
sure.
But Shaquill Griffin has had a rebirth in Minnesota. He kind of was at the end of the road the last couple of years. The Jaguars released him. He was just a backup in Houston. It started to look like he might be joining his brother and not be playing anymore. It was leaning towards that. He ends up in Minnesota, though, and he's having a fantastic season, has a couple of interceptions, been a big part of the success that Minnesota has had. I want to see DK Metcalf against Shaquill Griffin because we watched that on the practice field the first couple of years of Metcalf's career. And honestly, Metcalf dominated that matchup in practice. He dominated it in mock scrimmages. I want to see if he can get back after. They need a big game from DK Metcalf. He has not been the same guy since he came back from his injury, and I don't think all of that is on him. There have been some plays where he has come open, but Geno Smith can't get the ball to him because he's getting sacked too quickly, and the routes are too long developing, as we talked about yesterday. I think they've got to find a way to establish number 14 in this game, especially Shaquill Griffin's up against him. Yeah, he's a bigger corner with speed, but DK Metcalf has a history against him. And you can't tell me that Metcalf isn't going to have a little bit of chip in his shoulder like, I know you. I want to score a touchdown against you in this game. They got to find a way to establish him. And then if Stephon Gilmore returns to this game, he is a old savvy corner that's still a very good one. But Tyler Lockett and JSN ought to be able to get open against him. They ought to be able to make plays. DK Metcalf historically has played well against Stephon Gilmore. That Patriots-Seahawks game back in 2020, scored a touchdown, had over 100 yards in that game against him. And that was 4 years ago. I want to see the Seahawks be able to attack this secondary and make Brian Flores pay a little bit for some of the aggressiveness that he's going to have up front. Can they block well enough to do that? That's the biggest question. But attack these corners. I think the Seahawks have some advantages there.
I 100% agree. I also think that Minnesota's got some playmakers at the cornerback spot and at the safety spot. So we talked about that a little bit in yesterday's show. And as you said, I mean, we love to kind of talk about, reunion, so to speak. I love to kind of, the English teacher in me loves to kind of play with words. And the fact that the Seahawks have a player that they selected in the first round this year, and Byron Murphy second, and of course, the former University of Washington standout Byron Murphy is also playing at a very, very high level for the Minnesota Vikings. He leads their team with 7 interceptions, currently second in the NFL. He leads their team with 12 passes broken up. Of their defensive backs, he leads their team with 5 tackles for loss. He's got a forced fumble as well. Corbin, he was one of the most instinctive cornerbacks. He also played nickel, also played safety that I ever saw at the University of Washington. They've had some terrific players. Byron Murphy's a stud. And so whether it be Shaquill Griffin, whether it be Byron Murphy, whether it be Stephon Gilmore, whether it be Josh Metcalf, who is, in my opinion, one of the best nickel corners in all of the NFL, he leads the Vikings in tackles so far this season. This is a talented and very versatile Vikings secondary. And so I think that this is a game where it is critical that DK Metcalf gets back to being the 14 that scores, I don't know, maybe 2 touchdowns like 14 would suggest, or Tyler Lockett kind of reminds people that he is deserving of the type of dollars that he gets. And certainly Jackson Smith-Njigba, who of course has ascended to be Seattle's top receiver, I guess I should say, this season. Seattle's got to be absolutely humming at the pass catcher position here, because again, I think this is going to be a shootout. I think it's going to be a really fun, high-paced kind of a football game. I think that's one that could go in Seattle's favor, but if that's going to be the case, then certainly Seattle's pass catchers are going to have to be able to live up to their side of the bargain, because especially Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison in particular, that they're going to be putting some points up on the scoreboard.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, we got Crossover Thursday. Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings will take a deeper dive into this upcoming Week 16 matchup between 2 playoff hopefuls. Make sure that you are listening in, and thanks for tuning into this show. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.